In this lecture, we'll start looking at the studio discipline of sculpture, the first of the three-dimensional art forms. So looking at some of the sculptures, one of the earlier types of sculpture was the low relief sculpture, or simply a flat surface that was carved down maybe an inch or so, basically to create some type of image. In this case, one of the Mayan kings, the sarcophagus lid that was found in his burial chamber. So to create the image, they just carved down an inch or so into the surface, to bring out an image. So it's very similar to 2D pieces. And then the high relief is carving further into the surface so that you can start to model and render an image, so that the image appears, more like that of an actual kind of 3D piece put into a little recessed area. And so that is, the example of the high relief. And again, it's still sort of one viewpoint. Like the low relief, it's these are basically kind of meant to be viewed much like a 2D piece. And then next, we get in the round, so that the Rodin's Burghers of Calais was meant to be viewed from all sides, as opposed to just one point of view, like the low relief sculptures. And the round sculptures were meant to be viewed from all sides, set out there in public, so that it has 360-degree viewpoint. Where there's other interactive type sculptures where you can walk in between them, some where you can walk on them, climb on them, much more interaction that you can have. So some of the methods of sculpture, such as carving, and carving, of course, removing the material. So here the Olmec's colossal head, where they would have started out with, a gigantic block and, carved away, removed the material to create the image, as well as, shaping and doing some rendering and modeling to help give more form to the nose and the lips and the eyes and the ear spools, give more definition, to it. And the next method, additive method, where you're, in this case, the Mayan piece, where you're taking clay and you're adding, building onto your piece. So in this case, where you would, using a pliable material such as clay, where you can add to it and you can model and manipulate it to give it, in this case, more of a human form. You use some little tools to get in there to get the toes and the fingers and the facial features. And then another method is the lost wax process. And that's, getting into casting. So as you kind of follow along here, up on A, where you start off with the core, some type of solid mass, so that, the whole piece is not always solid. It could be hollow on the inside, but you have some type of core or something that would take up a lot of space, so that when you get to B, when you do the wax on top of the core, you're not having to use a whole lot of wax, and at the same time it cuts down on the amount of bronze that you would have to use for the casting. Bronze is probably the most popular. Iron is another metal that's used actually in the Spring Creek campus. They do iron casting as well as bronze casting. It's really, any type of metal can be used, really. So once you do all the work to build up your features, so in this case, adding the eyes, nose, mouth, ears, hair, and all of that. Once you're happy with that, you go to the next step on C, where you would add these wax rods, and sometimes some people add little pins to kind of help secure it to the core, and then a big wax cup at the bottom. Once all that is in place, you dip it into like a ceramic shell. So you do, some type of clay on the outside to kind of hold everything in place. Once that's dry, then you put it into a kiln, heat it up to dry out the ceramic shell as well as to melt away the wax so that you basically have a hollow void on the inside. Then you pour in the metal or whatever material you're casting with. Pour that in. The added wax rods are sometimes called pipettes that you add. That allows the air to escape so that the piece, the molten metal can get down inside there, and everything's will be filled up with the metal. Otherwise, if you don't add that, the air pressure will build up and you'd only cast like half of your piece. So then once that is cooled down sufficiently, you break away the outer shell, cut away the pipettes, the little wax rods, clean up your piece, and then you have a finished cast head in this case. And the core is also removed in most cases. So the Bodhisattva here on the left side, that's basically how these were created, how they were done. So some of the different materials that artists work in. So stone, all different types of stones out there. So here's the Louise Bourgeois, some of her work again, where she did this piece in marble. So there's all types of uses for stones, statues, sculptures, monuments, things like that. And wood also being a popular material, pretty easy to work with, much easier to work with than stone. Like stone, it comes in all types of different types of wood, different colors. So kind of a wide variety of materials that you can use. Clay. So the only problem with using clay is its sort of inherent strength, where it's fairly weak. So oftentimes you have to have an armature on the inside, something that will kind of help support the weight of it when you are sculpting your piece. Some of the times, wood might be used during the firing process. That wood is just, burnt out, so that you no longer need the armature. There's all types of methods on working with with clay and using the armatures. Next, metal. So metal, all types of different ways to work with metal, all different types of metals out there. Uh, and then the patina, so creating an oxidation to change the color of the metal. So the Richard Serra, where he's using plate steel for majority of his work, it naturally rusts, and certain certain metals when they rust, that actually kind of creates sort of a protective coating on it. Um, Not always the case with all the metals, but just some of them. So Richard Serra being aware of which metals to actually sort of use for this. When working with bronze, as said, since bronze is pretty popular with art, uh, bronze will react to different types of uh, chemicals and stuff that create the oxidation, and it creates a color on the bronze. So as opposed to always having to paint it, you can do patinas on top of them to change the color. And then next, some other methods, assemblage, where you take pre-existing pieces, pre-existing objects, put them together to create a new piece. So in this case, Pablo Picasso taking bicycle parts, putting them together, and of course he made a mold off of them and cast them, later in bronze. But essentially, he started off with handlebars and a bicycle seat to create the bullhead. Ready-mades, our good buddy Marcel Duchamp again, like his fountain, the ready-made. Art should be a commodity piece, pre-existing art pieces, basically, that you can go down to a store and be able to purchase art like anything else. So that's the ready-made, pre-manufactured art. Kinetic sculptures, sculptures that have some type of movement. So in this case, we got the Anthony Calder with one of his mobiles. So it's out there in a park, and as the wind blows, it sort of brings this things to life. So there's like Calder using wind. A lot of other artists might use wind for their pieces. Human manipulation, so as you, the viewer, are allowed to interact with it. Light, water, anything that can cause motion in a piece, it's going to be used. Just artists want to create a little bit something extra, so by having that movement. Then light sculptures, so it's, Dan Flavin working with lights, and remembering back to the elements, light being an element, and Dan Flavin back in the 60s, he and Bruce Nauman working with fluorescent lights and working with neon lights, and of course that kind of gets updated as technology and stuff change to where artists today are starting to use LED lights, projectors, all kinds of different things for their installation works. And oftentimes it's just playing around with this idea of color and how do we sense colors and view colors, so that some of the Dan Flavin pieces where having the certain color of fluorescent lights and a certain distance apart, basically your eyes will see these two different color lights, and kind of in between there, the two, light rays and stuff are coming together, and it's creating like a third color that you experience, even though it's not really there. It's creating this sort of illusion of color that you see and experience, even though technically it doesn't exist without the lights. Some fun other material, such as Jenny and Tony's chocolate gnaw, where she gnawed on a large block of chocolate, 600-pound block of chocolate. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find the afterweight of the block, but as you can see, she gnawed on that for quite a while. Beeswax, some other stuff that artists have used. If you look at Wolfgang Leib, who uses pollen for his work. Tom Friedman using paper for his sculptures. So, starting to get sort of outside of the idea of kind of normal working material. So, all types of stuff that people are using and having fun with that aren't sort of, what you would say traditional artists' material. So looking a little bit at the human figure, so we have on the left a monolithic piece, and the Egyptians did a lot of monolithic pieces, and basically it's cut from one stone, mono being one, lithic being stone. And some of their pieces, they like the relief sculptures, the high and low relief sculptures, meant to be viewed from the front. Same with some of the Egyptian monolithic pieces. They would have been placed to where their back's up against the wall. As you're approaching a temple or somewhere particular, these would be placed up against the wall. And on the right, the contrapposto, basically the Greeks figured out how to create sort of the natural way that we stand. The Greeks, also working with proportions, the human anatomy, to get more of realistic type image, mentioned before, the canons of proportion. So the contrapposto is that natural way that we stand, so that their images are more lifelike and natural looking, compared to the Egyptians, which is very stiff, rigid, not a whole lot of life or personality in it, as compared to the Greek sculpture. Although this is a Roman copy of a Greek sculpture, not a whole lot of bronze sculptures left from Greece, simply because the Romans melted them down. But since they mired and loved the Greeks so much, they typically would make a marble copy of it. So it's also the Greeks that they were the first ones to sort of free the sculpture and place it out in the public, out in the open, so you get the in the round. So, just for them, it was more of building on this whole idea of, natural looking sculptures. They would have been painted and decorated, clothes and stuff on their statues, so they weren't just standing there nude. They, typically would have had clothes on, as well as being painted. So that brings out, more and more natural appearance to them. And so getting into, some other types of sculptures out there, earthworks, really gigantic pieces. So this piece, the Serpent Mound in Ohio, done by the native cultures up there back, 1000 CE, so that Essentially, creating images of particular gods, with viewing for the gods. So, you're making these gigantic pieces so that the gods up there looking down are able to see them as well. Um, and there's also, some more modern earthwork pieces where the whole idea is, getting out of the sterile environment of a museum or a gallery so that uh, the work is more sort of awe-inspiring and should kind of create just a total different experience. Very similar to Christo and Jean Claude's piece, The Gate, where they had a series of these orange gates with kind of little curtain thing hanging from the top around Central Park. So again, their idea is that art should not be confined to special places, that anyone should be able to go and have interaction with art. So they chose Central Park for their Gates piece. So all you had to do is go down to Central Park, which people in New York, they might be going there anyways. So they can have this way to interact and experience the art. The Felix Gonzalez Torres that we talked about before, where he would create these pieces, and some of the pieces were sort of meant to have kind of a short lifespan, so that purposely creating a piece that essentially is going to live out its life, that it's not meant to be something permanent and everlasting. So that is it for sculpture. The next lecture is on architecture.